welcome back to Trust Versus with HITRUST. My name is Steve Perkins, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at HITRUST. Today, we're going to flip the script, and instead, I'm going to be interviewing Robert and Jeremy. To set the context here a little bit, as we record this, the industry and the nation is reeling from perhaps the largest cybersecurity event and breach in history. It's impacted lives across the country. And while everybody is trying to search for answers and inspect the root cause, we wanted to focus this episode on a little bit higher level context and thinking about the larger set of what's going on and what are the more systemic approaches and solutions to the problem. But I'm not here to do this alone. With us, we have our usual hosts today, Robert and Jeremy. How's it going, and how does it feel to be on the other side of the mic?
Hello, it's good to be back.
Hello, everyone. So good to be back here. Season 2 of Trust Versus. I can't believe it. It's been almost a year already.
Gentlemen, as you know, the subject is the mega event that's happened. A year ago when you were recording about breaches, you had talked about an event. Now here we are a year later, and we have an even larger breach, arguably the largest one in the industry's history, maybe in American history. It's certainly by impact. So we're going to dive into that. How does this keep happening? I mean, if you think about it, over the last how many years, the world spent a couple $100 billion a year on cybersecurity. So what's that, $1 trillion over the last handful of years? And by all counts, the volume of attacks is up. The severity of them are certainly up if we look at this. What's going on? Is there an answer to this? Can we win this war? Is there a such thing as secure?
There's so many cliches I've heard over the years about this very question. It's a great question, and one that we all have to think about all the time. I think one possibility is that the bad guys only have to be good one time, and the good guys have to be good always. That's certainly one way to think about the problem. Another consideration around this that I think about is just the magnitude of the events that any company that has a significant presence and an internet-facing presence has today. So maybe said another way, we're all targets, we're all potential victims. You have to really stay right at the very sharp edge of all of this. And I think lastly, one attack is not the same as the next attack. And so just the framing your question, just to probe on it a bit, the framing of the question really is like attacks keep happening. But I think we have to actually ask the question, okay, do attacks keep happening the same way? Do they happen because, we know how to defend the attacks and people aren't defending against those attacks? Do attackers change? Do the motivations change? Is the incentives for criminals to try to attack, major interest, certainly in the United States and elsewhere, how those things change? And so I think it begins with the fact that we're in an extremely active threat environment that is continuously changing, continuously evolving. It's not only a matter of investing in security, but it's a matter of investing in the right security and keeping your security always ready, always relevant, and always right. I mean, that's kind of the way I think about it.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I view this as an exercise in risk mitigation and not risk elimination, right? Cybersecurity has always been a risk addressing function and not a risk elimination function. I mentioned in the last season, if a bank wanted to completely eliminate the risk, they would shut down all the doors, all the windows, and no hands on any keyboards. Well, you can't do business that way. So there's always going to be risk associated with kind of being on the internet and using technology. And what cybersecurity tries to do is reduce the likelihood and the impact of bad things happening. But there's no elimination. And this is, I think, why you'll often hear cybersecurity professionals say, like, it's not if, it's when a bad day is going to come, and we have to be ready for it. And so that's why I think a lot of security functions have shifted from, all right, I'm going to try to button up everything as tight as I can, to how do I be more resilient when the bad day comes? How do I reduce the blast radius of the bad guys once they're in and maybe they breach one area of my perimeter? And this is also the driver behind things like zero trust, where you start to assume that, like, all right, well, how do I view the different aspects of the different rooms in my house? And how do I make sure that if one room gets flooded, the other room doesn't also get flooded?
It's interesting because about 5, 6, 7 years ago, the industry started to recognize that, shifted away from a pure protect and defend mentality to that detect and respond and recover mentality. So just out of curiosity, isn't the word security then somewhat of a misnomer for the general industry? I mean, you know this, the way you've just described it, but the average citizen out there is saying, we need to be secure. Isn't there a bit of an educational problem there where whether it be legislators or regulators, et cetera, thinking that we're trying to achieve security versus do exactly what you said is manage risk to acceptable levels?
I think there's a perception thing where people think, all right, security is a state that you achieve. And once you're in that state, nothing bad can happen. But the people on the other side of the keyboard think, all right, well, what's my risk tolerance? What's the organization's risk tolerance? And how do I get our defenses within that risk tolerance? Acknowledging that, there's always the risk, even if it's a very minuscule risk, somebody gets through, a bad day comes, but it's not necessarily a final state as much as an objective within a gradient.
So, Jeremy, you talk a lot about assurance programs. So what is an assurance program? What are the characteristics of a good one or a bad one in the context of what we've been talking about?
So HITRUST, we're an insurance company, we have an insurance program, but in general, what is the mechanism of just an assurance program? Why does it exist? And it's really, to me, about conveying confidence in something. And it doesn't need to be cybersecurity or really deal with computers at all. And so when I think of the word assurance, I think it's often confused because there's so many synonyms for it, but there's also a lot of attributes to it. And maybe the easiest synonym that I think of is assurance can be synonymous with confidence. So I'm conveying a degree of assurance over some attribute to give another person or another party confidence that that attribute's being met. In our world, a HITRUST assurance program exists to convey confidence that a system is secure and has a lower likelihood of having a breach and having some kind of reportable data incident. And there's a whole lot to it to make that happen. We communicate that we are a high assurance offering, which right there, a high assurance offering gives you kind of a first hint of one of these degrees of assurance. It's a characteristic of how strong is this assurance, right? Assurances can be weak or strong. And if I think about just the strength of assurance, maybe I think about how much confidence I would have in an answer. If I ask somebody a question and immediately off the top of their head, they gave an answer. Versus if I ask somebody a question and they hire a professional services firm to sit in a conference room for 3 months and do all this work to get me a really robust, well-researched answer. I'm far more confident in one answer than the other answer. And in the same way, in the security space, if I send somebody a cybersecurity questionnaire and they give it back a few hours later, sure, we have a firewall. Sure, we have a policy for this or that or the other, compared to if I give them a HITRUST certification, which took a lot of, man hours to research and pull evidence together and reach conclusions that are kind of based in evidence and fact. I have a high degree of confidence in one versus the other.
Let me scratch on that for both of you one level deeper. So it's assurance, that at two levels, isn't it? The controls are the appropriate, sufficient controls in span and detail to achieve the risk reduction. And then it's a second level of assurance, which is being sure that they're implemented with sufficient strength and maturity and sustainability. So it's sort of a double assurance construct there.
I think they all contribute to kind of the level of assurance that you get. Yeah, because you could have maybe poorly selected controls that are well tested. You could have well selected controls that are poorly tested. And either of those conditions would, affect the overall level of assurance. So those are, to me, characteristics of how strong your assurance is going to be at the end of the day.
Another dimension of that, Steve and Jeremy, I think of is, the complexity of just technology systems. I mean, these are not simple systems that organizations operate in the world today. They're highly complex. They're made up of different suppliers all working together. It takes a level of thoughtfulness, to Jeremy, your point about the right controls prior to even knowing that you select those. And I think we're actually working in a world that changes all the time. I mean, Who would have thought 8 years ago that you would be thinking about cloud service providers the way we do today? Who would be thinking about artificial intelligence and generative AI the way it's being used by many companies beginning, last year really in anger and moving forward, and the fact that that's going to change the whole way we think about the risk management and the controls that need to be validated to be certain that a system is actually operating with a level of assurance. So it's a continually changing universe, and it takes a lot of effort to kind of keep up and be thoughtful about how you approach the problem.
So that confidence that you talk about, we're talking about it's confidence in a security leader, having confidence in the program that they're overseeing. It's confidence in leaders and boards that the company is doing the appropriate measures. Are there other players that need to have that confidence?
I would argue that it is those two things, Steve, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg and maybe the easily to spot. As we heard at the time we're recording this, there were hearings in the House and Senate this week about this recent event in our industry. And, there were lots of questions about the level of confidence that the public should have and can have in the future about the activities that took place with the victim company. So, there's a concern from regulators, lawmakers. If you boil it down to its essence, there may be a concern from consumers about, is their information continuing to be safe, or is their information highly at risk? There's a concern in the health industry, at least, is, can I rely on the fact that I will have money in my account to pay payroll this week because maybe I am not yet being paid for claims? So how do I make sure the systems are operating so that I know I can operate my business and take care of my staff and personnel that are helping me deliver healthcare? So, I think I think we look at it typically as a narrower slice, but if you actually really ask the more social question or the moral question around this, it's assurance for the entire system. Is healthcare healthy? Are our systems operating in a level of security and privacy that is appropriate for the sensitivity of the information they carry? Do I know the system's always going to be available? If the system has an issue, do I have confidence we know how to recover that system? Each and every one of those is an assurance problem to be solved. And so it's a very broad space. And, the stakeholders across the universe, including the people that work in the system themselves that are actually responsible for delivering the assurance and the business of healthcare, are all constituents or consumers of those assurance models.
So that's a great perspective. So if the world needs confidence and needs to be sure that reasonable and appropriate security measures are in place and continuously with monitoring and management, you need strong assurance programs. That's what I hear you saying. Are they widely deployed and used? Why this seems so obvious? Why isn't everybody using strong assurance programs?
There's a cost benefit, right, analysis to be done behind that decision. To achieve high assurance, it's often, not cheap. It's not easy. It's not turnkey, because you've got to get, kind of smart people focused on the problem, and you've got to bring the best tools to bear. And those come at the cost of having your people not do their day job, but maybe do something to support those assurance, those assessments, those audits, which may be perfectly fine to use either a lower assurance mechanism or not offer assurances over maybe lower risk aspects of your business. But when it's a very high risk aspect of the business, or it's some maybe IT platform dealing with very sensitive data, maybe covered data, healthcare data, credit card data, stuff like that, there's no substitute for knowing, because when it's high stakes, you've got to know whether these controls are operating and whether the system's buttoned up.
I think, with no disrespect, compliance is a problem. And what I mean by that, certainly I don't mean that compliance is not important. I think the goal and the objective of achieving compliance has such an important and vital role in most organizations that characterizes the problem being solved. Like, I need to be compliant with in healthcare HIPAA, or in payment card services with PCI, or in banking with GLBA, and so forth and so forth. And so those standards and systems are self-defining in terms of here's the requirement and here's what you need to do. And I can traditionally achieve a level of confidence that I have asked those questions of the things I need to do. And I can say, yep, I have checked off that those things are done. And I can assert with a level of confidence that I am compliant with the requirement. And I would offer that compliance is not security. And organizations that seek compliance as the outcomes, I would also argue, based on my experience, are oftentimes not secure. And I think we will see that if we go back and review the last 15 years of experiences in the United States. Certainly, you will see many organizations that were compliant and had great compliance programs that were, in fact, victims of security events, possibly breaches. And at the end of the day, said we needed to go a little further. So I actually reverse the argument here, and I think leading companies should think this way. Assurance is about, to your point, if it's important, you need to know. Compliance is the outcome you get. So I think that's, it's a lot of great debate and discussion about events happening in our industry. Certainly recently, healthcare having this event. I've seen some people I respect saying, well, wait a minute, we're focused on this. Absolutely, we're too focused on compliance. Let's talk about assurance and get the compliance we need because we've done that work.
That's a pretty profound point of view. It's very simple. What's the real objective? Reducing the risk and then demonstrating compliance versus the other way around. Well, you mentioned it earlier. Recently, there have been a number of Senate and House hearings on the mega breach. As you think about those, what are they getting right and what are they missing? Where are they missing the mark?
Well, I think the first thing that's absolutely right is the fact that it's a matter of national discussion. So the fact that the senators in the Finance Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has oversight for healthcare policy in our country, that they are asking these questions and they are doing the work of working to find out what we need to know is right. So I think we have to just give credit for the fact that we're having the dialogue and the dialogue is being conducted at the highest level. In terms of what I fear we spend a lot of energy on is the answer is oftentimes let's focus on standards and with no regard to today's activities in this week's hearings. You go back and you look over the history of cybersecurity as a discipline, regulation event, more regulation event, lots of incredibly hard work being done on defining what security needs to be. So defining those standards. And so we'll see more of that. There's been a renewed call for more either standards in regard to healthcare or possibly a re-emphasis on organizations using more of the voluntary standards that have been more recently issued and maybe mandatory requirements for those things. Let's take the standards we have. The report this week, acknowledged by the victim, was a lack of multi-factor authentication was a predominant cause for this event that took place. Guess what? It's an expectation of almost every framework out there. And certainly any kind of risk analysis in 2024 would consider multi-factor authentication as a requirement. So are we going to mandate by law a single control? Or would it be better just to say, how do you know absolutely and with confidence you have tested that, it has been checked, it has been validated, and you know that the environment is locked down and protected with regard to that risk? And that's what I think the assurance part of this needs to be. So I think there's always a temptation to want to do more standards. It's the natural response to a problem happens. I want to solve the problem. I argue that we're standards rich and we are assurance poor. In healthcare alone, we have many standards. And so I think there are many opportunities to do the right thing, but every standard falls short of having a expectation about, has the standard been met? Maybe said another way, the standard tells you what you need to do, but it doesn't tell you how to prove you've done it. And so I would actually make the argument is if we're going to do anything, let's have better assurance models in the industry and all industries to actually validate these systems and know with confidence that we've actually met the standards we already have. The standards are good enough. We need more assurance.
I think you said a profound thing, which is nearly every framework and every standard covers multi-factor authentication, which is indicated as the root cause of this. Back to, okay, now what? To have another standard that just says, and you need multi-factor, let me say it again, isn't very constructive.
Yeah, and I think there were questions asked in the hearing about multi-factor authentication and indications that the analysis and investigation is still underway with the victim company, and so I suspect we will learn more as they come to understand why it was not present and why it was outside the scope of their validation program. You know, one thing, Steve, I think I heard this week in the hearing as well. Maybe another area they got it right is they actually are talking about healthcare more broadly than just this significant event attacking one of the largest companies, if not the largest company in healthcare right now. And there was a lot of conversation about doctors and hospitals in, rural America. I heard, Wyoming and Utah and Montana and lawmakers from those states asking questions about how do doctors make sure they get payment and recover from this. I think an important consideration that's also being discussed is how do you get this right across the diversity of the health system? So healthcare in America is delivered at the point of care, and a number of the organizations that deliver that are servicing underserved communities, places where there aren't enough doctors and there aren't enough hospitals. And, if we put in an expectation that security is going to be at this top level, we have to have a system that allows for that investment to take place. And so I think there are some really practical considerations around assurance that need to be considered as part of this solution here. And I think one of those is the fact that technology is not delivered by the company. It's delivered by the company with their suppliers, people like the web services companies, so cloud service providers, people that sell electronic medical record systems and health management systems. And so I think, we have to think about assurance models that actually allow us to validate technology across systems large and small, ranging from small systems with maybe a smaller amount of inherent risk to the biggest, most complex systems like the one that was recently attacked. And so we need to think about a system of assurances that allows you to size through different parts of healthcare. And it should also consider the fact that if you're a small company and your technology, 95% of it comes from Microsoft or Amazon or Google or name your other favorite service provider, you could actually get the security from them. And if you can actually develop assurances with confidence that you've inherited and you know that they're delivering a lot of that, it makes it so much more cost effective for a smaller institution to make sure their security is done and done properly. So, assurance needs to consider how we serve the smallest of healthcare companies all the way up to the largest as well.
So let me switch up to a couple last questions here. So throughout this, you've mentioned HITRUST, statement of obvious. You both work at HITRUST. I think HITRUST is a name that not everybody fully understands what HITRUST is and isn't. Some people think of it as a compliance system. Some people think of it as synonymous with HIPAA. You've talked about it being an assurance model. Some even call it a standard. Why don't we just take a couple minutes to talk about that?
HITRUST is an assurance mechanism, like we've talked about, in that we have certifications that people can achieve to communicate to their stakeholders that they've got secure systems, platforms, et cetera. And to achieve that, we've got a number of things, assets, programs available. For example, we've got a framework of controls, basically a really well-refined list of goals and requirements that an organization should strive to meet to be able to achieve a state of security and compliance with a number of standards. So we've got our certifications, we've got our framework, and to do that as well, we've got kind of supporting infrastructure like a web application to do assessments. And we've also got a network of professional services firms who actually do assessments where they go out and check the evidence to prove that these controls are being in place and met. And there's just a number of other supporting programs we've got, like the ability to share assessment results across parties and stuff like that. But It's tough to define HITRUST because we've got a lot going on. But I think we're most well known for this high assurance mechanism to be able to communicate to stakeholders that a company's got good security in place.
Well, HITRUST has always been considered or discussed as a gold standard or a premium solution.
At the simplest level, I think it's because we deliver high assurances and we deliver confidence at a high level. And I think that's really the outcome people are seeking when they know that they want to examine their systems and know that they are certain it's been validated properly. It goes beyond self-assurance and self-attestation, because self-attestation is based upon some model of control that you determine is enough. And I think the science of knowing what needs to be done is an important part of this exercise. And, if you go to different companies and ask for reports maybe with other assurance systems, you're going to get a different approach because it's going to be based upon the processes and practices of the professional services or audit firm that you hire. And so you get variability. It doesn't mean they're all bad. Some may be quite good, but some could be the most least expensive and cheapest to achieve, and they don't really go very far. So how do I really know? I need to know with confidence if I'm going to do this work, it actually delivers the outcome I'm seeking.
So if you have a HITRUST certification, can you still get breached?
The reasons you get breached, I think, oftentimes have to do with, the scope of the system. Has the scope fully covered the magnitude of the organization's technology? That's a thing to consider. Things have changed. If new attacks have entered the environment since the initial control creation, that can create an issue. Sometimes controls degrade, they drift. Sometimes new threats emerge. What we can say is that from an objectivity and from a science perspective, it is built on a model that is proven to be workable and is proven to create POSCOMs. We actually measure it. We have metrics available that show us that, while breaches still happen, it's a very small percentage. Less than 1% in the last 2 years have reported breaches with the HITRUST system in use, which I think is a good outcome. I'd like those to be even less. I'd like there to be none. I'm not sure that's achievable, but it's part of the work we try to do every day is to manage it absolutely to the degree possible.
We talked about the need for continuous improvement. New threats are coming out constantly. What does HITRUST do in that regard to stay at the forefront of emerging threats and to update and modify its control sets for evolving frameworks as well as the new threat landscape?
One of the things that makes our framework unique is that we've got this threat adaptive characteristic, or cyber threat adaptive characteristic, as it were, that incorporates threat intelligence from a big threat intelligence provider. And we look to see what's going on in the threat landscape across the world by way of what are the techniques and tactics that the bad guys are doing and using to try to penetrate networks and try to breach data by way of popularity and just by way of existence. We understand what's going on in the threat landscape using threat intelligence. And then we reconcile that threat intelligence back to the controls in our framework to see, do we have a mitigation for that technique or tactic in our framework and in our assessments? And if we don't, we make sure to try to bring those in to address the most prominent and the most severe cyber threats that are out there. But what you have at the end of this process is a constantly evolving framework of controls, cybersecurity protections, and mitigations that is updated over and over and over again because the threat landscape is constantly changing. And it may sound like a bad thing that, hey, I've got this update that I've got to keep up with, and there's another update and another update and another update. But it's actually a good thing because you want your standards, you want your goalposts to keep moving because the cyber threat landscape is constantly changing. What's good today won't be good tomorrow. What's good enough 5 years ago certainly isn't good enough now. But we've got processes in place to help manage those changes so it's not volatile for people trying to achieve HITRUST certification. Certainly we've got that in there. But this cyber threat adaptive characteristic we think is pretty unique, and we think it sets our framework apart from others.
Given everything that's gone down, what's your one or two pieces of advice that every organization should be thinking about or doing based off of the lessons learned of this mega event?
One takeaway for me is to think about the scope of your assurance efforts and the scope of your security program, because it's very, very common that certain requirements, certain controls are well documented as being achieved in your core, most critical system. But we realize more and more with these breaches that it's often not the core crown jewel system that is the target of the attack. That's secondary. The attack often starts from ancillary systems that exist because they need to be in the environment, maybe a IT desktop support remote desktop service, or the HVAC system, something like that. You've got to more and more include those ancillary systems inside your kind of heavy controls boundary and treat those more as critical systems because they're connected to the overall network, as opposed to, hey, that particular system, it's a support system and it doesn't process covered data. And so we can maybe not be as rigorous on the control expectations for that system. It's, I think, the wrong way to think about it, because time is proving that it's those systems that are often attacked first because they have a kind of less rigorous control environment.
Yeah, I think about the complexity of the system. I think about the fact that you're not protecting your assets, but you're also dealing with the, what some people call the weakest link in the chain problem. It's a network of computing and businesses that work together to deliver a business outcome. So it's your suppliers. It's the different parts of your enterprise that are equally at risk and maybe the point of entry. It is your service providers making sure that you're assessing their security and that they're helping you with your security. And it's thinking about it as a system of risk and not as a narrow scope of risk. And then I think that's kind of the first thing. I think the other thing you'd have to do is just go back and ask yourself the question is, not only do I achieve an assurance outcome, but what is the basis of that assurance outcome? And can I defend how I validated and tested my system with a level of documentation and specifics that I can prove not only that I have the scoring and the certification, the outcome I need, but I can be proud to demonstrate how I achieved that, and then I've got a level of rigor around that. And I think organizations are going to be challenged and questioned regardless of what happens from a regulatory perspective in the future. And the time is now to make sure you're really tight and you're well controlled on all those dimensions. I think another thing that we have to think about is the risk that occurs in industries or companies that are highly acquisitive, companies that are constantly seeking to, expand their operations through acquisitions and mergers. And I think actually one of the good stories that we saw in the testimony this week was the fact that the core of the buying company, the largest company in healthcare, to some degree, those systems were not yet interconnected in a way that risk or contagion crossed over into the core of the system. But it actually raises a larger question, which is, what is the pace of integration required? And I think industries like healthcare and financial services, both highly acquisitive, private equity, highly dynamic environments where systems are changing all the time. And I think there's a lesson to be learned for those industries to say, do the work to ensure that you have the right level of security rigor and security in place right at the time you buy somebody and they become part of your family. Put in place an assurance program to revalidate that system immediately after you're allowed to do that after a close of a transaction. And make sure that you're tracking them quickly through whatever improvements they need to get to. And I think we heard the public testimony this week, an acknowledgement that the company that was the victim wishes they'd gone faster with that work. And so we can learn from that lesson.
Robert, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for rolling with the punches as we flip the script here and put you on the spot. As this was the first glimpse into season 2, maybe you guys could share with us a little bit of what's coming next.
We're tackling this thorny problem of how do you create assurances in systems that rely on AI and machine learning like generative AI. It's a problem that doesn't yet have a complete solution, and we've got some smart people we're working with across the industry to figure that out. And we're also going to talk about the role of a security officer. How does the security officer deal with, the stress of the role, given the magnitude of importance that the work we do has for the people we serve. We're also asking the question about how do organizations actually mitigate risk in other ways, like the whole topic of cyber insurance, and can organizations actually make getting cyber insurance easier and more efficient, and what are tactics people can do?
Thanks for listening, everyone. And don't forget, if you like the podcast, do give us a like or subscribe on your podcast app, especially Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. We'd absolutely appreciate it.